Cantor, Jewish Book Council's editorial director, and I'm delighted to have you join us this evening for the launch of the 5th issue of our annual literary journal, Paper Brigade. Paper Brigade celebrates the breadth and diversity of Jewish books today through a mix of articles, fiction, interviews, poetry, translations, and artwork. This evening, you'll get a taste of that variety with short readings, reflections, and studio visits with some of our contributors. At the end of the program, all of the contributors who could be here today will be joining us on screen for a toast. In challenging times, we often look to the past to make sense of our present moment. And as we seek comfort in precedents and traditions, we also come to understand them in new ways. In addition to reassurance, we find inspiration. When I reflect on this issue of Paper Brigade, I'm struck by how the contributors delve into childhood memories and family stories, how they reimagine creatures from Jewish folklore to address modern-day issues, or how they question the accepted historical narrative to show how much richer the full picture is. The courage and creative brilliance of these writers and artists show us a way forward. I'm so honored to be featuring their work in Paper Brigade. Please feel free to use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to congratulate the contributors. I'll introduce each one before they speak, and in the chat, we'll share their bio as well as the name and the page number of their piece in Paper Brigade. If you'd like closed captioning, just click on the icon at the bottom of your screen. We've also posted a link to purchase Paper Brigade, and just until midnight tonight, we're offering you $5 off with the code LAUNCH2022. Lastly, I'd like to thank my incredible colleagues at JBC. Everything here is truly a team effort, and Paper Brigade would not be what it is without them. In particular, I'd like to thank Carol Kaufman, our executive editor. Carol and I have edited Paper Brigade together since it was founded, and I can't say how grateful I am to work alongside someone so insightful, meticulous, and deeply committed to our shared vision for the journal. Thank you to our executive director, Naomi Firestone-Teeter, our fiction editor, Josh Rolnick, our digital content and marketing manager, Simona Zaretsky, our designer, Catherine Messenger, and our fiction readers. And now it's my pleasure to hand it over to our executive editor, Carol Kaufman.
Thank you, Becca. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the official launch of Paper Brigade Volume 5. A few brief thank yous. First, I too want to thank all of the gifted writers and artists and designers who contributed their work to Paper Brigade. It has been a pleasure working with you. We are very proud of the journal and of you. I'd also like to express my deep appreciation to Paper Brigade editorial director, Becca Cantor, for being a fantastic editor and a wonderful colleague. Thank you to Jewish Book Council's executive director, Naomi Firestone-Teeter, a prized member of everyone's team here at JBC. Her contributions to the journal are everywhere to be seen. A big thank you to Paper Brigade's astute fiction editor, Josh Rolnick. We're glad to have him on our editorial team too. And finally, a shout out to the entire JBC staff who have been helpful and supportive as always. Thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoy the program. The first speaker is Lee Stein.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lee Stein. You may know me as the author of the satirical novel Self-Care or as the poet laureate of The Bachelor. On March 14th, 2020, the musician Roseanne Cash tweeted, "Just a reminder that when Shakespeare was quarantined because of the plague, he wrote King Lear." And a lot of people were very upset by this tweet because they're like, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Nobody's writing books. And I regret to inform that I am the person that wrote a book during the first phase of the pandemic, which is my collection, What to Miss When. And my piece in Paper Brigade is about the books that I turned to in quarantine. I went to my bookshelf and I looked for something by someone who had survived something like this. I reread Angels in America by Tony Kushner, which was about another kind of plague. I reread Yeats's poem, The Second Coming, which I learned was written when his pregnant wife, was recovering from the last flu pandemic. And I reread Anne Frank's diary. And I hesitate to compare my experience in quarantine eating quesadillas delivered to my home to Anne Frank's experience in the annex. But I do connect to her instinct to document everything from the drama of the war and the genocide to the mundane details of everyday life in hiding in the annex. So I felt this compulsion to document, and I started writing these poems. I had also recently stopped drinking alcohol about 2 weeks before my state of Connecticut went into lockdown, and I started writing poetry again for the first time in 10 years. It was like a light went on in a darkened room of my brain. So I wrote an entire collection of poetry in the first 6 months of the pandemic. I worried that by the time it came out in August of this year, that of course I couldn't have known that we would still be living through it. But I was also inspired to write this essay about Anne Frank because I'm sure many of you know this, but not everyone knows that her father didn't reveal her secret diary to the world. Anne actually wanted to be a journalist. She intended for her diary to be read after she heard a radio broadcast of the Dutch Minister of Education in exile asking Dutch citizens to document what was happening. So Anne's diary was one of 2,000 diaries that were turned in after the war. She revised the whole thing from scratch and finished her revision 3 days before the Gestapo came. So Anne wanted to share her experience with us, and I felt a similar pressure and desire to document those early days of the pandemic when so much was unknown and it was such a scary time. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lee. And now Julie White's followed by Moriel Rothman-Zecker.
This is the story of my golem and me. I'm telling the story about you and me. We're also telling a story about Passover. It's a story about ancestral trauma. It's a story about creation and destruction. It's a story about divine intervention.
Everyone. My name is Muriel Rothbecker. I'm a novelist and poet. And when I received the invitation from the Jewish Book Council to create something, to write something in response to and in conversation with Julie White's Golem character, my first response was, yeah. To be frank, a lot of times political art is heavy on the politics and light on the art. And the first thing I realized watching Julie's work and watching the Golem character was that here's work that is heavy on the politics and heavy on the art. And so I entered a series of conversations with Julie about this character and what we might create together or in conversation. And very quickly, it became clear to me that I wanted to respond not in my own voice per se, but in the voice of a character or a number of characters. So what I ended up doing was creating 3 fictional characters, a right-wing podcaster, a mainstream American Jewish journalist, and a mysterious graduate student. And each of these responded in various ways to the golem. but there was a way in which the graduate student who used poetry um, connected, I think, most deeply to what I think poetry allows, which is the I, the speaker that blends fiction and nonfiction, that blends self and imagination. And so when that speaker writes, I will not replace them, we murmur, while on the Route 100 tried by, not seeing anything but shadows of, well, you, there's an infinity, there's a multiplicity that I think follows the spirit of Julie White's Golem character.
Thank you so much. And now Paper Brigade's fantastic fiction editor, Josh Rolnick, will introduce the authors of the 2 short stories in this issue.
Thank you so much, Becca. I'm Josh Rolnick. I'm the fiction editor of Paper Brigade. I want to welcome everybody and thank you all for joining us tonight. We are so excited to have with us the 2 authors whose short stories were selected from among 140 submissions this year for publication in Paper Brigade. And just a quick note, our reading period is open again for 2022 as of today. But let's talk about these stories for just a moment. If you read these stories, you will quickly see why they stood out and why we fell in love with them. Into the Mud by Yael van der Wouden, a teacher and writer based in the Netherlands, and Sha'arei Emunah by Steven Volinets, a Brooklyn-based writer and journalist born in Soviet Russia. These stories have that truly rare quality of immersing you instantly into the world of the characters, making you care about these characters and their journeys, and transporting you through the poetic beauty of their prose. Listen to Yael writing about the moment her protagonist, Devora, realizes she may be falling in love with Miriam, her upstairs neighbor and golem building friend. It's a yawning summer day. Hands have drawn all clouds aside and the sun throws itself at the earth. I slouch next to her. When she is near me, I fold my body like I'm cradling an egg to my chest, something she's not allowed to break. And here is Stephen, writing about windshield washers glimpsed through the window of a Manhattan skyscraper by Stan, a Russian immigrant trader who gets unwittingly caught up in Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. With swiftness and practiced calm, the men dipped squeegees into buckets of liquid and glided them across the glass in crescent swivels, making the platform seesaw under their feet. Stan couldn't make out their faces behind the soapy blur, but he knew that he had never glimpsed freedom so assured, so elemental. It was the closest thing to flight without wings. And we are so truly fortunate that for the second year in a row, these beautiful stories were accompanied by the striking artwork of Laura Younger, which you can see on the screen right here. Laura is a Parisian illustrator and artist who manages to conjure scenes from these stories that feel like they have been there all along. At the same time, both perfectly realistic and somehow impressionistic, instantly suggesting something of the menace and narrative tension embedded in the stories themselves. We are fortunate to have both Yael and Stephen with us today. You can read more about their bios in Paper Brigade itself, but we are pleased now to bring you a reading from Yael van der Wouden.
Hi, thank you so much, Josh, for your kind words. I'll be reading the opening scene of the story, once again, Into the Mud. Miriam wants to show me something down by the lake, so I go. Her bike got stolen, she says, and could I ride her there? I ask, where is there? I don't know where you want me to go. She says, I'll tell you, and watches me wrestle my bike from the shrubs. Our apartment building throws a long shadow, and we're standing right at the edge of it, right at the edge. Miriam balances on the back of the bike, her hands on my waist. We're jostled with every bump, every pothole in the road, and she says, watch out, Debbie, and I say nothing. We're allowed to be friends again now that school is out. Every summer, Miriam gets restless in the upstairs apartment, tired of the heat, tired of her parents' arguments, and so she leans over the balcony railing and shouts my name, or heads downstairs and knocks on the door until Mom or I open it for her. Then she comes in, sits at our table, eats the almond in the bowl, says, still chewing, can we watch TV? And Mom will look at me like I should be the one to answer, like I'm in charge when Miriam is around. At last week's service, the rabbi spent forever talking about the dibbuk they'd found hiding in old Gaetela's microwave. Then he went on about evils close to home, about what to do when death enters a home, about the wickedness of the man who wants to control another being. Miriam came to sit next to me. You know, Barbara Lessing saw the rabbi piss against the tree in the park last week. Totally wasted. She laughed, her face too close to mine. Her breath smelled like bubblegum. Miriam was talking to me again. The seasons had changed. From behind me, Miriam orchestrates the journey. To the left at the roundabout, to the right after the bridge. The houses no longer cling together here. There are garden fences and sprinklers ticking in the noon quiet. We bike onward until there are no more houses by the side of the narrow road, only weeds. Every time a car passes by, we have to pull over to the side. Finally, I say, I don't think bikes are allowed here. Miriam digs her nails into my waist. God, you're such a pussy. Just bike. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yael. Stephen Vollinetz.
Hi, thank you, Josh, and thank you, Becca, and thank you so much for publishing Sha'arei Emunah. A year after Bernie's one big lie shattered the world markets and ended his career in finance, Stan knew that he would never again trade a share of stock or be allowed near a Bloomberg terminal. It didn't matter that it kept Madoff's name off his resume. Somehow everybody knew. At times, desperately missing Elizabeth, he thought of calling her and begging forgiveness. He considered sanding down the swastika like Deep Pascali had suggested and giving her the ring. She would read the inscription, for love eternal, kiss his face through tears and come back. But then he would remember that without the Nazi cross, the ring was worthless, a $50 pawn, and come to his senses. Now living in Brighton Beach, his work prospects beyond leasing cars or selling warehouse furniture quickly dwindling, Stan got up every morning and went to the local Starbucks, where the Wi-Fi signal was strong enough to browse the web and look for a job. And once there, it was amusing and absurd, but also somehow endearing to catch snippets of chatter during the afternoon stampede. A strange mix of Russian and English from local storekeepers and dental assistants, from mail-order wives, scorched blonde and rambling in their bejeweled iPhones, from retired transit workers, old Soviet-born Jews, cursing and arguing about Putin. And then, whenever someone came or left, to hear the street disrupt this fragile peacetime, this covenant among the weary, the restless, the insane, and how Stan wedged awkwardly among them. He had always fancied himself above this shouting, mumbling shipwreck of people. He was simply too American. But with Elizabeth gone, his future in finance shattered, and his mother in a nursing home, he could at last admit that there was something restorative in its abandon, its daily parade of tacky appetites and filthy jokes. They were like distant relatives who embarrassed him in front of strangers, but his company he had secretly missed.
Thank you so much, Stephen. E. Lockhart, Emmanuel Prietano.
Hi, I'm E. Lockhart. I'm very glad to be here. It's really an honor. Whistle is a graphic novel about a teenage activist who lives in Batman's Gotham City. She finds her family in dire financial situation and looking for ways to make money. She finds herself sucked into the criminal underworld. But she has to reevaluate her choices when she gets superpowers, wondering if and how she should use her powers to fight the criminals who pay her salary. Whistle is the first Jewish hero to launch as Jewish, not to be retconned or reinvented, the first hero to launch as Jewish from DC Comics since Seraph in 1977. Still, I owe a debt to many, many Jewish creators in comics, including the creators of Superman and Batman. and to the Jewish superheroes who and superhero characters who come before Whistle. Most famous being the Thing from the Fantastic Four and the villains Magneto and Harley Quinn. I grew up spending time in New York City's Lower East Side, and I invented for this book a neighborhood like that in Gotham City. In other words, an historically Jewish neighborhood that is still rich with history and culture, but that's now populated by a lot of different kinds of people. My illustrator, Manuel Pretano, couldn't be here with us tonight. He's in Italy, but he offered to share a glimpse into his illustration process by sending a video that documents the transition from initial rough sketch to finished lines to color. He worked creating this Gotham neighborhood from photographs that I sent him of the Lower East Side. The illustration you're going to see is new, and it was made especially for tonight's celebration of Paper Brigade. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mara B. Gad.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mara Gad. I am a writer and producer based in Los Angeles. And this evening, I'm going to read my very first poem for you. It is called Your Life Too. It was commissioned by the Jewish Book Council as a part of a program for Passover that reimagined the plagues. And this is my response to the plague of racism. The life that you are living is my life too, God whispered into my heart when I burst forth, brown, beautiful, a child of Israel, into a world that screamed and mistook me for a plague, while the real plague, the thick, choking fog of hate, blankets us, poisoning, blinding, killing our humanity slowly and our bodies quickly. If the life that I am living is your life too, then from where does liberation come, I ask? I created each of you as both the question and answer, God replies. When we were slaves in Egypt, you controlled the plagues. You started and stopped them. Can you not stop this for us? I controlled nothing, God weeps. Don't you see? I cry out to God again and again, from where will liberation come? Liberation must come from you, God whispers back. I put the answer into each human heart, as eternal as is the question itself. The life that you are living is their life too. It is my life. And when every one of my creations cries out when you cry and sings with one human heart, then the life that you are living will be their life too. Then will the fog be lifted. Then all will be free. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mara. Jack Sipes and Alenka Sotler.
Hi, everyone. And my name is Jack Zipes, and I'm going to talk very briefly about Bambi, a Jewish deer, and then introduce you to Alenka Sotler, one of the, I would say, most fantastic illustrators in Europe today. She can't be with us because she is in Slovenia, in Ljubljana, where I first met her several years ago. So I just want to read the first chapter, the beginning of the first chapter of the book, which I'm going to show you. This is, and you can see Alenka's illustrations there. They're really fantastic. The story of Bambi was not written for children. It has become universally beloved through Disney's films and books, which feature a heroic deer and cute animals who escape hunters and eventually celebrate Bambi's marriage. In the original novel, however, there is no happy ending. Bambi, A Life in the Forest, was written by the Austrian Jewish writer Felix Salten in 1921. It is a parable of the way Jews and other minorities were treated as inferior and dangerous beings who deserved to be annihilated. Salten rejected his given name, Siegmund Salzmann, in an attempt to become more acceptable to Viennese society. Bambi, written soon after World War I, is a study of the loneliness of Jews and their precarious lives throughout the world. Fascism was already raising its ugly head. In Salten's version of Bambi, the fawn grows up in a forest where hunters kill deer and other animals for their pleasure. To be a man in Austrian society, according to Salten, was to become a hunter, a murderer of helpless and hopeless victims. Felix Salten was one of the most outspoken Austrian writers in the first half of the 20th century. Although he sought to bring a message about the importance of civility to European and American readers, his works have been understood, ignored, and exploited. It is important, therefore, to explore why Salten failed and why he turned to animal stories such as Bambi to express his conflicted feelings as a Jew who wanted to be accepted by an elite Austrian society. So now I'd like somebody to project Alenka's video, please.
I spent half a year studying the material on Felix Salten. For Bambi, I developed two concepts. In the first one, which is now done, I let the text play a big role, while the illustrations are meant to encourage the reader's own experience of what is written. In the second concept, on the other hand, I strongly emphasize the hidden context of the text. The forest becomes Vienna. We see Bambi and the other forest animals being chased through the streets by hunters for no reason. That thought still haunts me. Bambi is painted by hand. It took me more than 2 years to finish. I love the handwork, the physical contact with material, the slowness with which time stops, an organic rhythm that contrasts with the crazy rhythm of time. In art, I am most interested in finding this tiny shift in thinking that is completely unnoticed at first, but later leads to the fundamental changes.
Thank you so much, Chen-Julie Wang.
Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you tonight. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Chen-Julie Wang, and I'm a civil rights litigator and author. My book is Beautiful Country. I don't have a copy with me, but here's a photo of the cover. It is a literary memoir about my undocumented childhood in New York City in the 90s. And tonight I will be reading just the opening 3 paragraphs from my piece titled Hunger in the Paper Brigade. And this piece honors the continuing connection between my childhood and my adult life, my immigrant journey, and my faith. I approached my first Yom Kippur with trepidation. It was not the idea of atonement that I feared, but the prospect of fasting, of choosing to go hungry. In 1994, when I was 7 years old, I moved with my parents from northern China to New York City, where we lived in poverty as undocumented immigrants. 24 years later, I remained haunted by the memory of attending elementary school every day on an empty stomach. Whenever hunger twisted inside me, I found myself transported back to that school cafeteria in Chinatown, counting down the minutes to the free meal. In 2018, my now husband and I attended Yom Kippur services in a local elementary school, a makeshift synagogue for Jews who had not yet found a congregation. We had tried several, but at that point, we hadn't yet discovered one that welcomed me as a person of color. Over a year before, I had whispered to myself that I would eventually embark on this avowal of faith, not knowing how my body would respond. Since that day, the thought of hunger had writhed inside me, telling me that I could not possibly face it, that last and most physical of my childhood scars. In the middle of the morning service, I realized with a start that we were actually in the school's lunchroom. I was seated right in front of the serving station, where I would have stood as a child, my stomach turning over pockets of air, waiting for food to be slopped onto my tray. I wondered why it had taken me so long to register where I was. Maybe I hadn't been ready to revisit the past to see its perfect alignment with my present. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you again to all of our contributors and everyone here in the audience who's joined us today. Our mission at Jewish Book Council is to educate and enrich the community through Jewish literature. We're a small nonprofit, and support from readers like you is crucial to our initiatives. I'd like to encourage you to support us by becoming a JBC member. And if you're intrigued by what you've seen and heard tonight and would like to have even more from our amazing contributors, we're posting the link to purchase Paper Brigade and the discount code again. JBC's next event will be the Jewish Writers Seminar for Adult Readers on December 12th, this coming Sunday, over Zoom. It will be a fantastic day full of panels with agents, editors, and authors. I myself will have the pleasure of moderating a panel with our Paper Brigade writer Helene Wecker and her editor and publicist. If you're interested in the seminar, you can find a link to register in the chat as well. And now, finally, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Ruth Behar and Marjorie Agosin, who will lead us in a closing toast.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful experience with vibrant artists. And on behalf of Ruth and myself, we are very honored to be here with you and to be featured in a conversation. And it's always a joy to encounter Ruth throughout these years, whether it's in a magazine article or in our very often conversations by phone, by email, and we are very thankful and honored.
Thank you, Marjorie. It's always amazing to be in conversation with you. And in this case, knowing that others would be listening to our conversation was really beautiful. And I'm so grateful to Becca and Paper Brigade for giving us this opportunity. It was really totally lovely to do this conversation together.
I also feel that Ruth and I have shared our past, our Latin American past, our Latino present. And as I heard all of your writing stories from different parts of the world, we somehow belong to Latin America, to the Caribbean, to South America. And we feel that both of our countries, Ruth's Cuba and my Chile's, gave our family refuge during different pivotal times of history, especially for myself and also for Ruth during the Holocaust.
Yes, so we both come to our writing from the Spanish language, which makes us unusual. Marjorie writes in Spanish always, and I write in English, but always translating in my head, thinking what it would sound like in Spanish. So we come to our writing from the Spanish language and from the history of the refuge that both our families found in Latin America, Marjorie's family in Chile and mine in Cuba. But we both very much feel that we wouldn't be here if not for those countries that gave our families refuge at a very, very painful time in history.
And we wanted to share with all of you that we became young adults writers a bit later in our careers. And we find a great joy to write for the youth of, let's say, the Americas. And we hope very much that the stories we learn as young children, young women will become part of their world, because I still feel, I think Ruth also feels this way, that Latin America remains incredibly invisible to the North American eyes. So we have tried to contribute to our Latinidad and through our Judaism to bring forth these stories.
Absolutely. We both are very aware of our double or multiple heritage, and that's very important to us in our writing. And it was as if by total serendipity, the two of us, as we reached the peak of our careers, I guess we could say, that we both decided to start writing for young people and to really try to document and preserve our Jewish Latina stories and to make them part of Jewish literature and American literature and Pan-American literature as well.
So I believe that we will toast with a lot of hope for a better future for all of us, for the world. And I would like to quote the very inspiring words of Violeta Parra, a Chilean folk singer, poet, novelist. She wrote an autobiography in verse. She wrote a very famous song, Gracias a la vida, thanks to life. So we thank life, which is another Spanish version of L'chaim, and to the faith in our future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in this time of the pandemic, more than ever, as we've seen, the importance of writing, of making art has really stood out for so many of us. To write, to make art is to conjure the precious and painful moments of life, to immerse yourself in the urgency and beauty of storytelling. And as Marjorie just said, to have hope for the future. So L'chaim and Mazal Bueno, and may these conversations continue.
Gracias. Bye.